Whether you have an employment, criminal, family, corporate, or personal injury matter, legal issues can be puzzling. The lawyers at Devry, Smith & Frank make all the pieces fit together.
Welcome back to Real Estate 101, where today we're going to talk a little bit about spousal support and alimony, and I'm pleased to be joined once again by John Schuman of Devry, Smith & Frank, LLP. John, welcome back to the show.
It's good to be back again.
All right, John, so what is spousal support or alimony?
Well, in Canada it's called spousal support. Alimony is the American term, and it's one of the most contentious issues in a separation or divorce because it involves one spouse paying the other spouse money even after the divorce is finished, and one spouse can't figure out why they should have to continue to pay their ex-spouse money after the divorce is done, and their ex-spouse feels like they're not getting enough credit for what they did during the marriage, so why is this big fight about giving them money? But spousal support is amount paid by one spouse to the other spouse for support of the spouse, not for the support of the children, not as a property payment, not for any other purpose. It's to support a spouse. And it's done for two reasons. One is to compensate the spouse for all the work they did during the marriage, and the other is to provide a bit of a soft landing so that when the spouses separate and one spouse makes more than the other, the spouse who makes less doesn't lose their lifestyle all at once.
Now, do you need to be married in order to get spousal support here in Ontario, or can you still get it if you're just living together?
That's a good question, because a lot of people talk about spousal support without considering whether there's an entitlement to spousal support, and if there's no entitlement to spousal support, then there is no spousal support. If you are a married couple, that is that you actually got married, then there is an automatic entitlement to spousal support. So one spouse can claim spousal support from the other one. How much is a different question, but one spouse, married spouse, can always claim spousal support from the other spouse, married spouse. If you've just lived together, then you may not automatically be entitled to spousal support. One of a few things has to happen. One is you have to have lived together for 3 years, or the second is you have to have a child. You either have to have given birth to a child or adopted a child together, and then you're entitled to, the spouse is entitled to spousal support. If you have a child together, but you've never lived together, you're not entitled to spousal support. So you have to live together to get spousal support.
Okay, now how is spousal support calculated?
Spousal support is a really complicated type of concept, and actually in the end it's ultimately up to the discretion of a judge. A judge can decide how much spousal support is going to be, and it can be a big number or a little number depending on how the judge feels on the day. But in order to give some consistency, a group of academics came up with these things called the Spousal Support Advisory Guidelines, and it's a fairly complicated formula. You plug in a lot of data and it comes out with a number, or actually not a number, a range of numbers for what spousal support should be. And the Ontario Court of Appeal said that judges should give some thought to what that formula creates, as well as what that range is that comes out of the formula when they're awarding spousal support. They're not bound by it. A judge can still make whatever order they want for spousal support they want. But the reality is judges find that range of spousal support very, very, very persuasive. And it's often you hear that people just hand up the judge a calculation that shows what the range is, and the judge picks a number within that range. So it's not actually calculated according to that. It's actually calculated on a bunch of factors, such as how long the parties have lived together, whether one of them has earned substantially more than the other, what they did during the marriage, what the impact of the breakdown of the marriage has been, what the property settlement looks like. All those factor into how much spousal support should be. But judges look at this formula.
Okay, John, so how is spousal support paid? Is it weekly, bi-weekly, monthly, annually?
Well, like the amount of support that's paid, it's also entirely discretionary. And there's a number of ways that it can be paid. It's not automatically a monthly payment. Child support is automatically a monthly payment, but spousal support is not. And in terms of long-term marriages, you may want to have spousal support paid over a long period of time because the amount that has to be paid or the impact on the spouses of breaking up. But often spouses want a clean break. They want it over with. They don't want to pay their spouse anymore, and the other spouse doesn't want to get money from their former spouse anymore. So in that case, a lump sum payment can be made. And a lump sum payment is basically all the support payments that would have been paid monthly grouped into one. Although, there's some adjustments to that for the fact it's all paid at once, and there's some tax implications for paying it monthly as opposed to paying it as a lump sum. Another alternative is that you can actually combine those and have a lump sum payment for a big amount and then smaller monthly payments, or monthly payments only for a fixed period of time. So it's really completely up to the parties if they're deciding, or a judge to decide how spousal support is going to be paid.
Okay, so what are some of those tax implications?
Well, if you're receiving periodic payments, as you're getting them monthly or weekly or every 2 weeks, then you have to pay tax on them. And the person who's making the payments gets a tax deduction for them, and it comes right off their income. So if you're the person paying support and you're a high income earner, it can be quite a big tax deduction that you get. If you're the support recipient, then you may end up owing a lot of tax because the payer doesn't take off source deductions. You don't get like the amount taken off for tax every month. You owe that money when you file a tax return, and so you can be kind of surprised when you get your support for a while that, look, you file your tax return, now there's this big amount of tax owing. So it's important to remember that you have to set aside some of that money you get every month for tax. If it's a lump sum payment, which means you get all your support at once, or the person pays all the support at once, then it's not tax deductible and it's not taxable to the person who gets it. It's just a straight payment. So you don't have to worry about paying tax on that. Another consideration is that if you're the recipient, and this is important, you've got that big tax bill, is that the money you paid to your lawyer to get that support is a tax deduction for you. So the portion of your bill that relates to getting spousal support, you can deduct from the tax you owe on the spousal support that you received until you've paid off your lawyer in full.
Okay, John, so is there any way to avoid spousal support?
Simple answer is, well, you can do a marriage contract, and in a marriage contract, if you negotiate it
Ahead of time?
Yes, ahead of time, and follow all the proper steps, then the marriage contract, you can opt out of spousal support. If you have a marriage contract that says you get no spousal support even though you've taken time off work to raise kids, you're in a bit of shaky ground. But other than that, a good marriage contract that's properly negotiated with good, competent lawyers will get you out of paying spousal support. The other time you may not have to pay spousal support is if there's been what's called a gross repudiation of the marital relationship. And that's the person who's getting the spousal support does something really unconscionable to repudiate the marriage, and that's more than having an affair. It's a really significant abuse or destruction of the marriage that's clearly designed to say that there was never any marriage in the first place. And if you're the support payer and you think you're going to rely on that, you should talk to a lawyer, because chances are you're not going to be able to do it. It's a really hard case to make.
Okay, John, so for today's final question, there's a notion out there that you can get out of almost anything by going bankrupt. Is that the case with spousal support?
No, in fact, the opposite is true. Spousal support survives bankruptcy, and all the arrears survive bankruptcy if you don't get out of anything, and going bankrupt can actually increase the amount of spousal support that you owe. Because spousal support survives bankruptcy, while you're in bankruptcy, you have to keep paying your spousal support even if you don't have any money, or you have to pay your other creditors. And anything you don't pay during your bankruptcy continues to accumulate with interest that you have to pay your spouse when you finish your bankruptcy. And in addition, everything you owed before you went bankrupt, you still owe as well. So going bankrupt really has no effect whatsoever on your spousal support. In fact, it can make it worse, because if you had a property payment owing to your ex-spouse, or another big payment that got wiped out by the bankruptcy, the courts are very, very willing to increase spousal support to compensate that spouse for what they didn't get because you went bankrupt. So if you got out of a $50,000 property payment because you went bankrupt, a court's going to be very willing to add $50,000 onto your spousal support, which survives the bankruptcy. So you could actually end up paying more by going bankrupt. If there's an entitlement to spousal support, you should assume that you're going to have to pay it and you're not getting out of it.
So there you have it. If you're having any spousal support issues, get in contact with John Schuman of Devry Smith Frank LLP. Stay with us right here on Real Estate 101, where I'm going to be joined by Tracy Brock of Dominion Lending Centers, where we're going to talk a little bit about reverse mortgages. Thanks for watching. I'm your host, Joe Terceira, and we'll see you next time.